There is another device you'll probably be hearing about. It's called transnasal insufflation. It's basically a gigantic oxygen tube, much like the oxygen tubes that you may have had during your sleep test or the nasal cannula, except it's big and it's made to blow a huge amount of air without sealing, okay? And it's interesting. This is what it looks like. I actually have one. It's not the only one. This is actually I guess I should open this so you can see it. By the way, what happened to that probe? Did it get around? Okay, it's made it back, yeah. This is what it looks like. It kind of looks a little like some of the CPAP devices. Everybody who wants to, welcome to come up and have a look at it afterwards. This is made by a German company. The people at Baltimore, Hartmut Schmidt, has published a couple of papers on it, and now it's being made and probably will be sold very shortly by Fisher Paykel also. I don't know who else. I think there's a third company that's making it. The idea is very simple. They put this thing on. It's much less cumbersome than a CPAP mask. It is still attached to a tube and a blower. Turns out you can use a CPAP blower, but there are specially modified ones that do a better job of it. It's quite uncomfortable if you don't humidify the air, but if you humidify the air, you don't really have too much discomfort from it. And overall, patients seem to find it very comfortable, and it just works on a somewhat different principle. We don't titrate it. You just set a single sort of flow, and it seems to work or not work. Again, the data is it's not as good as CPAP. It works in a fraction of patients. There's still a lot of discussion about which ones. We're pretty sure it doesn't work in severe apnea. But it does work in a fairly wide range of moderate and mild apnea. And it works for people who have apnea plus something else. That's where it was first discovered, people who were getting this high flow for other reasons, to moisturize their lungs because of lung problems. And it was noticed that this seemed to work. So you're going to be hearing more about it. As I said, it basically works in about half the people. It's been tried in pediatrics. It's been tried in some special groups. There's very little literature on it. There's only, I think, 2 or 3 articles that have been published, but there are people looking at it. And again, I think I'll end with that. And I personally think it's working through a system much more like CPAP. It's basically building up pressure, but it can only build up a little pressure, and that's why it doesn't work in everybody. But I'm not sure that's true. Again, that's being studied. I think probably I've said as much as you want to hear, and I will just end with a quote which I happen to think captures some of the essence of the last 20 or 30 years by a friend of mine, Phil Westbrook. And he basically said the following, and I have to say that it remains probably the best treatment we have for apnea. Some form of pressure plays a role. Now we have to make it comfortable. And so I'll end there. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Yes?
I heard about studies where they stimulate muscles and throw like a pacemaker. Are you optimistic about those?
Well, again, I have to disclose, I am on the advisory board to one of the companies doing that, so I'm not sure I'm optimistic, but I'm involved. And it's an interesting idea. Once again, it's based on very sound thinking. It's obviously fairly invasive. The idea is the following. We know that the tongue and the muscles lose some of their strength when you go to sleep. And in fact, if you think about it, once again, everyday speech tells you this. What do you say when somebody's falling asleep? You say they're nodding out, okay? And that term comes from what? It comes from the fact that if somebody falls asleep, their head goes down. As they wake up, their head comes up. That's the muscles back here, which, by the way, the muscles we use in cat experiments instead of the chin muscles to record sleep. Sleep is intrinsically tied to loss of muscle tone. And so sleep apnea is thought to be caused by that loss of muscle tone. So it makes perfect sense to say, let's use an electrical stimulator to stimulate the throat and replace the tone that sleep caused you to lose. It's an idea that's been floating around for 15 years. That one of the companies, Medtronic, that makes pacemakers, got involved in this, spent 10 years and mega millions of dollars trying to develop this. They gave up when the guy who was working on it died about 5 or 6 years ago. And a company recently picked up. There are actually 3 companies, I believe, working on it now. The idea is there's one nerve that comes and innervates all the muscles that we would like to stimulate. You can put a pacemaker alongside it. You can embed a battery pack in some way to stimulate that. You can drive the nerve when you want to. There are different approaches. One approach is drive it on every breath at the right time when they're going to collapse. Another approach is drive them whenever they fall asleep. So they go to bed, they flip a little switch, and other approaches are conceivable. You could say, well, can I figure out when they stop moving their sleep, turn it on automatically? All this kind of stuff is being explored. The bottom line is, does it work when you turn it on to cure apnea? And the answer is kind of. Okay, it's not as dramatic as we like. One worries a lot about whether a better pacemaker, a better contact with the nerve, and so on, would help. It's not going to cure hundreds of thousands of people, but for a select person, it might work. There are currently, I believe, 10 people who've been implanted with this thing, and they're trying it out. So it's made progress. It's out there, something to keep an eye on. But I probably wouldn't throw out your CPAP and travel to Germany or Hopkins where they're doing this and have one implanted quite yet. Yes?
What about doing exercises yourself? I've been doing tongue exercises, yoga exercises as well, for a few months now.
Does it seem to help?
I have to say that I've been aware of dreams, having dreams, and for years I haven't been aware of it.
Well, again, this is an idea that's been bouncing around for a long time, and there's not a lot of data. The data that there is was never able to prove that what you're suggesting worked. People have suggested it. There have been various exercises. Some people tried yoga. Some people tried actual physical exercises, having a little thing they push against with their tongue to train it. It's possible that it will work. There are reasons why I would argue that just strengthening is not enough, and that I think is what the data shows. It turns out when you study the strength of people who have strength in their tongue, of people who have apnea and don't have apnea, apneics are stronger than normals. They're not weaker. And the reason is probably that pushing your tongue forward is one of the defense mechanisms. So you're already trained if you have apnea. You probably have already been doing a kind of an exercise with every apnea. And further training isn't clearly going to benefit unless it's retraining. And that's very important because in rehab it's full of that. Having a muscle that's too strong can pull a joint out of place. And sometimes training the opposite muscle is the way we relieve joint pain. So maybe there's some of that, and the trouble is, I don't know, perhaps somebody who knows more about this than others, but I don't know how to train you. Now, there's some interesting stuff out there. Again, I like the bizarre, so I know about these things, but there's a very interesting study that supports this idea. And you may have heard about it. It turns out that one of the patients of a friend of mine in Switzerland was a didgeridoo addict, and he had sleep apnea, and he said, I think that playing the didgeridoo helps me. And so he did a study, and Otto Brandley, who is the sleep doctor he went to, didn't believe this, but supported it, because you listen to patients and you try it. And they did a study, and they showed a dramatic effect of taking a bunch of people and teaching them to play the didgeridoo and showing their apnea got better. We tried to replicate that, and I don't know if any of you here were part of that. We tried to enroll some people and teach them how to play the didgeridoo. And I can't give you a final answer because we couldn't get anybody to stick with the training long enough. You had to do this 20 minutes a day, permanently, and the effect. So I don't know if it works or doesn't. We only got 2 people to train. I actually tried to take up the didgeridoo to find out how hard it was to play. And again, I don't know if it works. It seems to in some people. I know of very few sleep clinics that have succeeded in starting a didgeridoo class program. But it does support the idea that there's something you can do.